So I have a question that's more tactical about closing. I've been asking different brokers this. I'm brand new to the industry. Oh, it's like someone else is unmuted.
Yeah, I'm gonna mute them. Go ahead.
Okay. Brand new to the industry and just trying to ask as many questions as I can to all the brokers who are willing to talk to me. And one of the questions I've been asking lately is um, at closing, on the tactical side of that, um, in terms of lawyers and the like handling of escrow and the orderly turnover, do you recommend that I have a relationship with an attorney that I provide to the buyer and seller to conduct that part of the deal, or do I expect them to have their own attorneys and they coordinate that? How do I steer that in a way that gets the deal done, but also like doesn't take on more liability than I should be taking on for the legal stuff?
So I would definitely say you want to establish relationships with closing attorneys. And what I would do since you're in Virginia is, did you join IBBA directly or did you join the Virginia's Carolinas Business Broker Association?
I joined directly, yeah.
Okay. So I think that the Carolinas Virginia Business Broker Association, I think it's CVBBA. I believe they have a relationship with IBBA now, much like California, Texas, Florida, and some of the others do, where if you join the local association, you get your IBBA membership free, whole
Right.
thing. Okay. I would highly recommend you join your local, the CVBBA, because that's where you're going to meet some transaction attorneys. You're going to meet closing attorneys. You're going to have resources from other people that are in your local market, in your area, where you can ask them, hey, who do you use for this? Who do you use for that? And you can start building that, building that network for yourself, because you need that. You've got to have, you need to have good attorneys that are not going to kill your deals. It's
Right.
really critical.
Yeah,
And yeah, so that's what I would do. And if you're not a member of CVBBA, then I would just go online to their website, look on who's on their board of directors, and make a call. And just
gotcha.
say,
Yeah.
hey, I'm new in the industry, and and I need some recommendations here on who I can call for this or for that. And they'll
Gotcha.
help you.
Thanks. Yeah, I joined IBBA directly because they had like a CBI bundle that came with membership, and that's how
Okay.
the conference. And I know EXP has a kind of
They've got
partnership.
a special deal too.
Yeah, so perhaps it's just someone that I meet through that network, but that's helpful. A few brokers I've spoken with have basically told me like, no, you don't do anything with that. The seller and the buyer have their own attorneys, and they handle all of the closing. So you just kind of turn it over to them and keep the trains running on time, but it's
So
expected.
but let me ask you, I mean, when you think about that, just from a pure logical standpoint,
Mhm.
if you're trying to quarterback things, I mean, you're basically trying to make sure that this deal is going to get done. So seller and buyer may have their attorneys, and that's all well and good. But if they don't, do you really want them going out on Google to find an attorney?
No.
Or you want to be in a position where you can say, hey, look it, I've got this person, or I've got these 3 attorneys that I know are good, and or I know are closing attorneys that other business brokers have worked with. They're used to dealing with business transactions, right?
Gotcha.
So, leverage. The best thing I can tell you when you're new is leverage the experience of others. You don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. Just leverage the experience of others. And you will find that business brokerage is very different from real estate in that, especially within the IBBA, within M&A Source, within your associations, typically you're going to find people who are very willing to help you and to share knowledge with you. They don't see you. There are those, 80-20 rule, right? So you're going to run into people that look at you as competition. But at the end of the day, there's millions of businesses that are going to transact over the next 10 years. And there's, I don't know how many business brokers, but not many, maybe 10,000 across the country.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm here. So thank you for the advice there. And I'll look to connect with a local attorney that can handle closings that even if they don't use, I can recommend, use this attorney.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And then,
Pam.
if I may chime in a little bit too, because I actually am an attorney. I came into this from the lawyer side to the real estate side.
Okay.
But very often, if you do anything locally, you'll start to see the same attorneys again and again. And just develop a relationship with any attorney, any client, buyer or seller side shows up with, because you'll probably see them again.
True. Very true. Thanks, Scott. Pam.
I wanted to add that I typically have a list of the closing attorneys, transactional attorneys, and I let them know that, particularly the buyer and my client, the seller, that they're neutral and they can ask them any question they want to ask them, but they are, they don't represent either party. What I have experienced my last two transactions is that the buyer wants representation. So they get their attorney, they draft all the documents. That seems to be a long process to me, because then the two attorneys go back and forth and churn up the time.
Yeah.
But anyway, I feel like it's the buyer's right to choose. Is that correct?
Well, I think so. Here on the West Coast, we use third-party neutral escrow companies to handle the closings. And so seller and buyer, may have attorneys, may not. But the escrow company is really a third-party neutral that's doing everything in terms of UCC searches and all the paperwork and and handling all of the money and doing the disbursements afterwards and everything else. So closing attorneys is not it's a different concept than what we have here on the West Coast, so I'm not as familiar with it. And then I think it varies state to state too, in some instances, because my understanding about closing attorneys is that they are kind of neutral. But then I've also been told by other attorneys in other states that they represent, maybe the attorney represents the seller, but they'll handle the closing, but they actually represent the seller, and the buyer should have their own attorney. So, I think it does vary a little bit state to state.
But it's the buyer that's bringing the contract, right? They're the ones that's bringing the offer.
Sometimes, I mean, they are, but if you're marketing the business, a buyer is coming to you. In Georgia, you guys are licensed, so do you have purchase agreements? I forget, in Georgia, that you can just fill out the forms for them?
Yes, and we have one in our brokerage. It's just sometimes they feel more comfortable. Well, it just depends on the buyer, really, and if they've ever bought a business.
Yeah. So in that case, you're helping the buyer put the purchase agreement together, and then they're going to send it. If they want an attorney review, they're going to send it to their attorney. What I found here in California, because we do have all of our purchase agreement forms and LOI forms and all of that, for the most part, on Main Street transactions, typically, we're using CAB forms. On lower middle market transactions, if you have a private equity buyer or somebody, they've got a law firm doing all of their LOIs and their purchase agreements. So it really depends somewhat on who the buyer is, also, and the size of the transaction. And for smaller transactions, the forms tend to work. And then, if the buyer wants an attorney review, the attorney will generally write an amendment they'll accept the CAB form and they'll just write an amendment to it. Because our forms are very neutral. They don't favor buyer or seller. And attorneys like to advocate for their client, right? Some more zealously than others. And so, every once in a while, you'll get an attorney that's going to write a 5-page amendment that's going to do a whole bunch of stuff that's ridiculously one-sided. And basically, at that point, The seller then has to get an attorney to write a counter offer that negates everything the amendment just did. And you almost always end up going back and forth 2 or 3 times, and you end up with the regular cab purchase agreement as it is, which is just really annoying because everybody ran up a bunch of fees. But that's how it goes sometimes. Yeah. So yeah, definitely good. But Scott was right. You're going to run into the same attorneys over and over again. So, Brian, what I would suggest is if you have an opportunity, if you have some that are in your local market, invite them to coffee, or lunch. Just say, hey, can we get together? I'm new in the industry. Can I ask you a couple of questions, whatever, invite them out.
Thanks. Yeah, that's my plan. I think it's frustrating, like going through all of the IBBA coursework and going to the conferences and talking to everyone, and then you get to actually the brass tacks of doing a deal, and it still feels just like there's gaps of like, okay, who's on first, and who do I need to call here? And this is one specific area that I'm trying to get that last puzzle piece in. So I appreciate it.
Well, the other thing about business brokerage is no matter how long you've been in it, every deal is different. There's no cookie cutter. I mean, you can have all kinds of checklists, and you should have checklists for all kinds of things. And you want to have processes in place, and you want to stick to your processes as much as possible. But there's always going to be curveballs thrown. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. There's always something that's going to come up. You're going to have to figure out, how to get over it, some hurdle, over it, under it, around it. I think that one of the primary skill sets that you have to have as a business broker is creative problem solving, because you're always going to have to figure out, okay, this just went south. How do I bring it back? How do I get this thing moving forward again?